welcome back to Walking with the Chosen. I am your host, Shay Keith. In this episode, we're going to talk about The Chosen Season 1, Episode 2, called Shabbat. So, Shabbat is a day of rest and a day of worship. When I was growing up in my Catholic home, I always knew that it was Sunday because the first thing we would do was go to church. Then we would come home and have a big breakfast. My parents never worked on Sunday. They didn't do anything more than just load the dishwasher or cook dinner. The rest of the time was just for family time, whether it was the summer and we were at the lake enjoying the boat or swimming or having fun fishing, or maybe we were back home in the wintertime and we were just watching some good old TV movies. Whatever it was, we always took the day seriously. My parents believed that Sunday was the day that we just needed to take a break. Something that I discovered was kind of interesting about this episode is that I traveled to the Middle East a few years ago to visit Dubai in the UAE, United Arab Emirates. And while I was over there, I was surrounded by Islamic or Muslim people, and I learned that some of the things that they do in their society is very similar to what they're showing here in The Chosen of what the Jewish people did around the turn of the millennium. And that basically was that the women always cover their hair. And I have a friend that's a Sikh. He's from India. He's a Sikh religion. And we went into the Gurdwara in Dubai. And one of the things that the women had to do was cover their hair. That was one of the first things you have to do. And the men, too. The men were also required to cover their head as well. So we had to cover our hair to go in the Gurdwara. But the Muslim women, the Islamic women that are in that region, they wear their hair covered and they're totally covered the entire body with, I don't remember the name of the clothing that they wear, but it just goes over whatever clothes they have on underneath. And the purpose of that was for decency. They want the women to stay decent so that the men can't look at them and see that they're wearing tight yoga pants and see the outlines of their body. The other thing I thought was interesting was in this episode, you'll see that Mary is at a salon and she's helping some women get their hair done and make it look pretty. And no men are allowed. That's a comment that was made. When I was in Dubai, I was also at a salon because I wanted to get some of the artwork done on my arm. And when I was waiting to get the henna done, my friend came and knocked on the door and he opened it to see if I was ready to leave. And the ladies chewed him out for coming into the door. Men aren't allowed. Men aren't allowed. In fact, it's so illegal. He could have got arrested for doing that. I don't know why that rule is so strict there, but when that door is closed, the women are inside, men are not allowed around. It's very interesting. So I thought that was interesting here as well. So I wanted to read to you a little bit about what I did on some research. This is something I discovered as a new Christian, and I started reading the Bible. And when I say new Christian, I think I mentioned this already in the intro episode. I was raised Catholic, but I did not know the Bible, and I did not know Jesus. The Chosen is what's helped me learn that Jesus was this real person on our planet and why his significance of living here was so important. But what I learned was in Genesis, which is the first book of the Bible, we learn about Abraham and Sarah. And Abraham was fatherless. But yet God told Abraham that he was going to have descendants that would number the stars. He would have so many children. But Abraham was old. He was 86 years old when God was telling him this. And he might have told him that sooner, but when he was 86, his wife Sarah was like, we're not getting any younger, and God promised us you're going to have children. So maybe you ought to go be with Hagar, the Egyptian slave that we have, and bear a child with her. And so he did. And they had a son, Ishmael. And then later on, 13 years later, God appeared to Abraham and said, your wife Sarah is going to bear a son, and you're going to name him Isaac. So Abraham and Sarah had a son, Isaac, and Abraham had another son with Hagar named Ishmael. And the reason why this is important and why I find it interesting is because how I was talking earlier that I saw the similarities between the Islams and the Jewish as far as some of the customs. The hair salon was one, the hair covering was the other, and also the way they celebrated their holidays. Now, I don't know a lot of Jewish people today. I have a few friends that are Jewish, and I haven't asked them this question. I know that Shabbat is celebrated on Saturday. Technically for Jews, it's from Friday night at sunset until Saturday at sunset. And the Islam people, when I was over in Dubai, the one thing I realized was that they celebrate their day off on Friday. So when you're in Dubai, their weekend is Friday, Saturday, and Sunday is their first day of business. Whereas here in the US, our first day of business falls on Monday because we have Saturday and Sunday off. But back to my story about Abraham, and the reason why it's important was that Ishmael, the son he had with Hagar, the slave, ended up being the ancestor and the great prophet to Islam. And Isaac is the ancestor and the grandfather of the 12 tribes of Israel, which we'll learn more about in season 2. That comes up in another topic. And once you realize there are 12 tribes of Isaac that he grandfathered basically, then you understand how the Jewish kind of spread out in that same region as you have the Islam. It's spread out also. So they kind of have similarities, but that's all part of the Middle East and why it might seem different than our culture here in the West. So we were introduced to a few new characters in this episode. First, we get to meet Barnaby and Shula. These are friends of Mary that she invites over to Shabbat. Shula is blind and Barnaby is hysterical. Luckily, I could say that they will be in future episodes of The Chosen. I really like both of their characters. Barnaby's always kind of cracking the jokes, and Shula's always kind of like, oh, Barnaby, knock it off. I really like them as a couple, and I'm really curious if, since she is blind, and since they brought that out in the very second episode of The Chosen, will she get her sight back through Jesus? I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Hasn't happened yet. We also get to meet Thaddeus and James, and then Jesus comes back into this episode as well. I really like this episode. It's pleasant. It's not one that's going to make you just start crying all the way through the episode, or, you know, that big, huge ending that you just start crying your eyes out. But this is a really good episode. So let me step you through it now that you know a little bit of the background of Shabbat and the Middle East and how everything works there. The episode opens up in 948 BC in an area called Kinnereth, which is a lake called Lake Galilee, or it's an area around Lake Galilee in the Bible. So this young boy, Eli, is asking his family members about why do we celebrate Shabbat? And she's talking about the importance of it, and it's to honor 3 things. It's to honor our family and our Jewish people and God. But most importantly, to honor God and all his works so they can rest on the 7th day, because that's what he did. And I also like how she says, resting allows us to refresh our souls and get to know God better. What a great way to get to know God is when you're not working, you're not moving around, you're just there, it's peaceful, and you're listening. Then the man standing behind her speaks out all of a sudden, and he says, a woman of valor, who can find her? This is the introduction of something I cannot pronounce, and if I do, it'll come out like a bad word, so we're not going to go there. But it's an ode to women of valor, and you can find this in Proverbs in our Bible, Proverbs 31, verses 10 through 31. And basically what it's saying is, how can I find this outstanding woman of faith? This is the perfect Jewish woman that a man should have. And it's a great thing if you go take the time to read 10 through 31. I read through it earlier, but I didn't want to spend all the time in this podcast to share every verse of it. But I highly recommend you go back and check it out, because it says a lot of good things about a really good quality person in general. You know, this is how a woman worked back then. Like, she worked hard for her family, she prepared, she did all these things for them. But it just says a lot about a good quality kind of woman for her husband. So after we leave that section, then we jump into they do all the intro credits, and then we get to Capernaum. And so now we're up to speed in the current day and time, and we see Mary in a hair salon. She's standing around, and one of the gals there says, hey, Mary, why don't you come over here and braid so-and-so's hair? And she's like, oh, no, I couldn't do that. And she's like, oh, no, you'll be fine. I've seen you braid other people's hair. So you see Mary kind of has a little smile on her face, and she goes over and starts braiding. And then, you know, the more I watch the show, the more I catch these little things that I might not have noticed before. But I see Yusuf walking into the red quarter where Mary is. And as he's walking through, he's standing really proud. And he's kind of got his shoulders back. And he's walking through there. And all of the Jewish people who are running around getting ready for Shabbat. You hear the lambs in the background and other sounds. They're all got their heads bowed. They're looking down. And I think it's because Yusuf's walking through. And so Pharisees were the people who basically said, these are Jewish laws and we're going to enforce Jewish laws. So of course, they're all going to be on their best behavior because, here comes the principal of the school walking through. We don't want to get in trouble and get thrown in detention, right? So they're all bowing down, and Mary runs out to go find some flowers to put in this woman's hair that she just braided. And she's not paying attention. She's on a mission. She's going for those flowers. So she's running through there and she's saying, oh, I'm sorry, bangs in another person. Oh, I'm sorry. And these people are all standing there quietly. And I never really caught that before. I was always wondering why she was bumping into people. But I think it's because she was focused on one thing and everybody else was like, oh, geez, there's Yusuf, better be in our best behavior. But Yusuf sees Mary and he's like blown away. He's like, wait a minute. I remember this woman. I saw her last week. Nicodemus tried to save her and redeem her from all those demons. And here she is running through the red quarter. What's going on here? So he takes off in haste. Then the Chosen brings us to the Roman side of things. And you see Matthew and Gaius standing around waiting to talk to Praetor Quintus. And Matthew is Matthew. Matthew is a very intelligent person, extremely intelligent. And if you ever read the book of Matthew in the Gospels, you'll see his fine details of everything that he writes. So the way they've designed this character for the show really helps you see the possibility that we could have had somebody maybe on the autism spectrum back around Jesus' time who was very detailed oriented and going to write every little detail. And we see that he always carries around a cloth in his hand all the time. I don't know if that's just to help him with his nervousness or it's kind of like his safety blanket, but he holds that in his hand every time he's talking to people. And Gaius is talking to a Roman soldier. And as I mentioned in the first episode last week, the Romans refer to the Jews as dogs. And it's said right here in this episode that Roman soldier's like, go tend to your dog over there. And of course, the Roman soldiers know that Jews can be killed like that. They do one wrong thing and the praetor can be like, kill that guy, get rid of him. He's in my space. He's breathing my air. So when Matthew shows up with Gaius wants to leave. He doesn't want to stay there. He doesn't want his head to be on the chopping block with Matthew. But Matthew's insistent. He knows Simon. He's seen Simon. He knows that he's up to no good. And whatever promise he made with Quintus better know what's going on. So Matthew approaches Quintus. Gaius is, you could tell, terrified. He was on the way out the door before Quintus calls him back. It's like, hey, aren't you his escort? Where are you going? And he nervously is like, I was going to go, protect this hallway over here. Quintus saw right through it, brings them both in. Hurries up, Matthew. Hurry up, get to the point. What's going on? And Matthew explains that I think Simon's up to no good. And after he does his little explanation and basically tells Quintus, you might have not thought this through correctly, that's when the Roman soldier standing by Quintus pulls out his sword and he's like, you better say your last breath or say your last prayer, Jew. And he's ready to go after him. And Gaius goes to the floor like, oh gosh, here we go. And then Quintus like, no, wait a minute. I got to hear this guy out. He's surprised that a Jew is coming in to rat out other Jews. So Matthew explains that he's not the right guy. You can't trust him. And so after Quintus thinks about this, he realizes that Matthew might be that person that can help him learn about whatever Jews aren't doing the right thing as far as the Romans are concerned. He knows who his bad eggs are thanks to Matthew. And the funny thing I think about this episode is when Matthew acts like, oh, good, I'm on the good side of the praetor. He's always calling him Dominus, and he's always being very respectful. And when Quintus was like, I think I might have a secret purpose for you, Matthew. Matthew just has this big smile on his face like, thank you, Dominus. It's like he wants to be accepted by somebody because obviously the Jewish people don't accept him because he's a tax collector and nobody likes a tax collector even in today's time. So he's looking for somebody to approve of him. He needs his place. He needs to be fulfilled. After we see Matthew basically bowing down to Quintus, we jump over to the bar, the same bar where we saw Mary run away from Jesus and then later get saved. We see Andrew and Simon is running around the bar. He's chatting up all the boys in the bar. He's buying them a round of drinks. I mean, he's He's got a big old happy smile on his face. They're none the wiser. They don't know what's up. And I guess I should mention there is a couple more characters we're introduced here briefly. We see John and his brother James. Now they'll be in future episodes. We'll see a lot more about them, but we do briefly see them when Simon walks past them and has a little bit of a conversation with them, a brief conversation. But then Simon goes back over to Andrew and sits down with him. And I love the interaction between them because Andrew is he's the guy that's always Mr. Doubtful. And I know he's not the doubting Thomas that we'll meet later, but he's kind of snarky. He'll say things that you're just like, really, dude? He acts grumpy at times, and we'll see that in future episodes a lot more, where Andrew is always kind of like, why does these things have to happen? He just has this sad part about him, or an angry part. And Simon also has an angry part, obviously, to him, but they're just different. They're brothers, obviously. But I like this interaction because Simon comes and sits down, and Andrew asks him, like, what is up with you? Why are you so happy? He goes, because I'm handsome. And he's like, how can you be happy? Are you fattening these guys up for slaughter? I mean, what are you doing over here? And so then Peter changes the look on his face. He's like, better? He tries to look like he's really mad or sad or whatever expression he's trying to make. But you can just tell that his expression totally changes. He can't win either way. But he is believing that he's making the right choice by turning in these merchant ships. They're these big conglomerations. They're going to go out there and they're going to haul in all the fish. So the poor little guy like me and you, Andrew, we can't catch anything. So he feels like it's justified. We can take them. It doesn't matter if they get thrown into some Roman jail cell or who knows what. He just cares about his family because his wife Eden and his brother Andrew, they are what keep him up at night. We get to see Nicodemus again, and as you see in the beginning part of this scene, they flash some words up there. It's like demons and exorcism. So we know that he's still contemplating Lilith. So he's taking down notes and he's writing things down, and the door busts open and Shmuel's like, teacher, come with me. And he's like, what? I was trying to study. What are you doing? And he takes him off to the judges of the Sanhedrin so that they can talk to him. Well, he's like, what is this about? And he's like, God is good. Well, Nicodemus doesn't seem to really know what's going on, and maybe Shmuel doesn't fill in the details, but they show up in front of the judges, and Nicodemus is like, what are the charges? And they're like, charges? No, this woman's been saved. And they point over to Yusuf. And Yusuf's like, I saw it. I witnessed this myself. I followed her. I followed her to the hair salon. And that's when he's like, men aren't allowed in the hair salons. Like I said, in Dubai, they're not allowed there either. And he's like, no, I saw her walking around and then I followed her back and I'm for sure it was her. So now Nicodemus has this puzzled look on his face. Like, what? Like, how does this happen? Because how does she get redeemed? She sure wasn't getting saved while I was there. And then the judges are like, we want to send this stuff off to Jerusalem. We want to move quick. We need to make sure that this rumor doesn't spread too fast. And Nicodemus is like, wait, I understand, but she might freak out when she has a bunch of rabbis and Pharisees coming at her because she was a troubled woman before. And now if she's better, maybe I should just go see her. And I'm sure this was just Nicodemus's way of saying he just wants to go see her first for himself, because I don't think he believes it. How could he believe it? Because he just said the prior week, he says, only God himself could save that woman. And the judges bring it up too, that you said that no man could save this woman. So they're all kind of like, what's going on here? So we know that Nicodemus is going to have to follow up. He needs to go check out Mary for himself and learn about her. And of course, in his mind, she's Lilith. He doesn't know her name is Mary at this point in time. We jump back over to Andrew and Simon. This time they're at the beach. It's at nighttime in the dark, and they're watching. We're like, okay, Shabbat starts at sunset on Friday night. So here it is Friday night, and they're out there watching. They're looking. They're like, oh, I see there's people out there. So they're going to not be back on time for Shabbat. We know they're going to be out there fishing. And Simon's like, help me, Andrew. Help me find who these guys are. And Andrew is just not buying it. He's there physically, but he's not there mentally. He just does not want to help Simon drag people down. Especially, he mentions some young guy, kid, or whoever it's on one of these ships that looks up to Simon. And Simon's like, what do I care this kid looks up to me? It's not my problem. Why does he look to me and not his own dad? So it's interesting that Simon has just he keeps doing all the wrong choices. And you can see this repeatedly. He keeps doing things that I think we know in our hearts are wrong. He shouldn't be turning in his fellow people. He shouldn't be lying. He shouldn't be hiding anything. And we'll see later when he's confronted by his wife, even she is aware that something is going on. It doesn't seem quite right. Gaius shows up in the next scene and using that Roman brute force, uses the end of that sword to knock out one of those Jewish people and put him in his place, because that's how it's done. He wanders over to Matthew working in his booth, and Matthew is trying to wipe off some blood on his face. Obviously, he upset some civilian that doesn't agree with Matthew being a tax collector and beat him up a little bit. And he's like, you should go home and take care of yourself. And then brings up something about, Matthew says, no, my father taught me to work better than that. I have ethics, basically. Gaius was like, you must have Roman blood in you, or your father taught you well. And then Matthew's like, I don't have a father. He's like, what do you mean you don't have a father? And he says, well, he says, I have no son. And so it kind of makes you wonder, like, what is going on there? How can Matthew have a father that says he has no son? I wonder if we'll learn more about that in future episodes. Finally, we get to see Nicodemus confront Mary in the Red Quarter. She comes out of the salon and she doesn't have the hair covering on her hair as she's walking through there, and some strange man to her approaches her and tries to talk to her. And it's like, Lilith, is that you? She's like, I don't answer to that name. And he's like, but weren't you Lilith before? And she's like, my name is Mary. It's always been Mary. But he knows who she is. He recognizes her, but she doesn't remember him. She can't remember that he was there visiting her and try to redeem her. And he asks her, like, what has happened to you? How long did it take after I left before you were healed? And she's like, it wasn't anything you did. It was someone else. And he's like, who? And she's like, I couldn't tell you his name. And even if I could, I'm not really allowed to. And he's like, what do you mean? And he kind of gets a little defensive. Like, I'm the Jewish leader around here. Why aren't you telling me something? And she's like, his time has not yet come. So even though we know Jesus is the Messiah, nobody's really allowed to say anything. Nobody's supposed to say that he is the Son of God. So she doesn't want to say anything about who Jesus is other than one of the best lines of the show that I absolutely love. And I own one of the sweatshirts that says this because I love these words. And I had to write this down because I don't want to say it incorrectly. But she says, I was one way and now I'm completely different. And the thing that happened in between was him. Yes, I will know him for the rest of my life. And I think anybody who remembers that time that they were saved as a Christian can relate to these words. Because as my pastor likes to say, his name is Nick, and he always says there's a BC Nick. And BC was before Christ, right? So there's a BC Shay. There was a person that I was before, and there's a person now, and we are totally different. And the only thing in the middle, the only thing that was different was Jesus. He came in and he showed me a different way. And once I started following Jesus, my life has changed. It's in a new trajectory. And that line is just one of the best lines ever. And it's so true. And I was talking to somebody recently and they even brought that up. And I don't even know that they were referring to the show. They just know how those words are so true. There's just something different in the middle. And that is Jesus. And that line is just, it's so good. There's something else that happens in this scene that I didn't catch the first time. I've seen this episode more than half a dozen times. I couldn't tell you, I lost count. I watched it again tonight before I start doing this podcast recording, so everything's fresh in my mind before I go live. And when I was watching this, I caught something. I had to back it up a few times and rewatch it because I've never seen it before. But when Nicodemus is talking to Mary and she says, I need to go prepare for Shabbat dinner. And he's like, you're so mended, you're fixing Shabbat? And he's like, what? You were possessed by demons a week ago and now you're making Shabbat dinner? How does that happen? And he's blown away. She's like, well, it's probably not going to be as good as yours, but I will try. And it flashes back over to Nicodemus and you see out of his eye a little tear that just goes down. And I was like, oh my gosh, Nicodemus is impacted by Mary. Seeing her redeemed is affecting his heart too. And I never caught that before. That's a huge, huge thing, I think, to see a Pharisee impacted by one of the Jewish people because of some person. And he said himself, only God could save her. So he's got to be like, who is this person? This person that doesn't want any reward, who doesn't want anybody to know who they are. Who does that? Who does miracles? Who does anything great without saying, hey, I did all that? Jesus didn't come here to be a magician. Yes, he did signs and wonders, but he was doing God's will. That's why he was here. He wasn't doing it to have his name in lights and let everybody think that, he was some fancy magician. As we get closer to Shabbat, we see the families all gathering together. We've got Simon and Eden and Andrew together in one household, and Eden's got her hair covered up, and you can tell she's just unhappy. She's sitting there. There's no smile on her face. There's no smile on Andrew's or Simon's either. Like, they're all sitting there. And we have Mary. She's saying the words, the same ones that I mentioned earlier. If I say them again, they're going to sound like a bad word because I can't say it properly. But for a woman of valor who can find her. So she starts reading through all those words, and we see Nicodemus with his wife, with their guests that are there. In the background, she's talking about all their precious gold and, this beautiful artwork, and she just sounds like she's gloating in my mind. Look at all the stuff that I have. And Nicodemus was the reason why she has all this stuff, because he's this high leader of leaders, teacher of teachers. But, he's over here looking at this tapestry, and his wife's talking about all this. And there's this couple that shows up. And the thing that always struck me after I started reading the Bible, this thing popped out at me again. The couple walks in, and he whispers to his wife, he says, try to get a seat at the head of the table. Well, if you go back to the Bible and look at Luke 14:10, and this is from the ESV version, he says, but when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at table with you. Don't be that guy that's like, I want the best seat in the house. Go get that one. We want to go sit right next to the rabbi. It really stood out to me when I was reading through the Bible and I had those thoughts in my mind. That's the joy of watching The Chosen. Once you have these characters in your mind and you have like a face, and then you go back to the Bible, it's like you see these characters come to life out of the Bible, and it just makes it so much more fun and a joy to read. So Mary prepares her Shabbat meal, and her friends, this is when we finally get to meet Shula and Barnaby, and they walk into her home, and Mary's very nervous. She wants to do everything right, but she hasn't done this in many years, so she's like, I don't know if I'm doing this right. And then she hears a couple guys talking, and they're like, I think this is Mary's place, and she's kind of like, who are you? And they said, well, we were told this would be a good place to come and eat. And she lets them in. So they come and sit down. And now we're introduced to two of Jesus's disciples. This is James and Thaddeus. So they sit down at the table with them. And they're questioning, why do you have this extra seat here? I think Shula asks. And she's like, well, it's for Elijah, right? And they're like, no, that's only for Passover. She's like, oh, well, I'll have a head start. Well, what she doesn't know, she goes to close the door, and she's like, is the first star out there yet? And Barnaby's like, yep, let's eat. He's like, let's pass through all this fancy stuff. Let's just get to the food. And we hear a knock at the door. She goes to answer it, and it's Jesus. And she just stares at him. She's like, it's you. And she's so flustered, she doesn't even invite the man in. And when she does invite him in, she doesn't even think to like, oh, go have a seat over here. I mean, she's just so... She's probably very elated and happy, and she just doesn't know, like, what do I do, And so luckily Shula's like, invite him to sit down. Oh, yeah, take that chair. So then we start hearing her read through the words, and then it kind of shows the other scenes with Nicodemus and his group of people that are there, and they're so excited that he gets to be the one that talks to them. One other side note I wanted to make real quick, too, as I'm thinking about it. This couple walks in, and the man says, you make us whole. And Nicodemus' face drops, and he's like, only God can do that. He was clearly upset about how this man was referring to him was godlike. And even his wife, earlier on in the episode, made a comment about, these people look up to you. You're the rabbi of rabbis, or the teacher of teachers. I can't remember what word she used. And, she's like, they look at you like they're eating dinner with God himself. And he's like, is anybody else hearing this? He obviously is humble enough to know he is not God. And he doesn't like his wife saying that you're so godlike. And he doesn't like this couple coming in and also coming out saying the same thing. Like, we're empty without you. You fill us up. You fill this hole inside of us. And Nicodemus was like, no, I don't. That's God that does that. So as we see everybody sitting down and having their Shabbat dinner, we get to hear Mary talk over the food. And she says all the words, which are very nice. I liked hearing all that. I liked how they use that music at the end and ties everything together. And at the very end of the episode, we see Simon standing on the shore again, end of Shabbat, or at the beginning of Shabbat, I guess. The sun is set, and he's out there, and here come the Roman soldiers. Obviously, he's getting ready to maybe do some work for them. We don't know. We'll have to see in one of the future episodes what happens with that scene. So that was all that happened during this particular episode. So final thoughts I have about the show was, obviously Shabbat is a time of rest. And as I said earlier, we have the different days where the Christians celebrate on Sunday, the Islams celebrate on Friday, and the Jewish celebrates on Saturday. Technically sunset to sunset. So Friday at sunset to Saturday at sunset. We also got to see Mary enjoy her new freedom since she was redeemed, which was kind of a nice thing to see how much joy she has inside of her. And like I said before, anybody that's been saved, I think we can relate to that joy that we feel once we've been saved. She doesn't understand how she is healed, but she knows that Jesus is the reason she's healed. And Nicodemus is confused. He doesn't know what's going on about all of this. We know that Simon is still struggling. He's trying to justify his actions as to what he's doing. We know Andrew is frustrated with him. His wife is frustrated with him. He's clearly lying to his wife. He's not being honest with her about what's going on. And she's like, what's up with you? And he's telling her that, it's all good. You still got everything you need. You got food to eat, right? So what are you complaining about? So she's very frustrated with her husband. And we know that Matthew is basically alone. He tries to get food ready to take Shabbat, so we can assume that maybe he's going either to his friend's or family's house, and a dog shows up and decides that he's going to adopt Matthew. And Matthew's like, wait a minute. And I don't know if this is true or not. I was told that back in those days, the Jewish people didn't like dogs. They thought they were dirty. I know that when I was in Dubai, the people around there, they also consider dogs to be dirty, and they like cats. And maybe that's because cats clean themselves so often. But in Dubai, you'll see wild cats, house cats, just everywhere. They're at all the different museums and locations and stuff because they're considered a fine animal to have around, as a dog is a dirty animal to have around. So maybe there was some truth to what that person told me, that the Jews thought dogs were dirty and didn't want them around. But yet we see Matthew talking to this dog and feeling compassion. The poor guy is alone. He already said his father doesn't claim him, and he doesn't have any Jewish friends because he is a tax collector, as I said before. So maybe this dog will be his one friend at this point in time. But it is kind of sad to see that Matthew is the outcast. And then we finally get to meet Thaddeus and James, Jesus's disciples. And we get to meet some of Mary's friends as well, which is kind of cool because you'll see them in future episodes. The final thought I have about the episode is there's one line in there that I'll leave you with. And that is when Mary is reading her prayers over the Shabbat dinner. And she says in the words, "You have lovingly and willingly given us your Shabbat as an inheritance in memory of creation." I thought this line was lovely, and it's something that we should think about more often. So if you liked this episode of Walking with the Chosen, you are more than welcome to leave me your comments and your feedback on my page. You can find it at walkingwiththechosen.com or podcast.walkingwiththechosen.com. And you'll see a place on there where you can record and leave me your message and let me know what you think of the show, or if you'd like to see me add more things or change things up. I really rely on listeners or viewers like you to let me know what inspires you and what encourages you to keep watching the show. I'm learning as I go. I have been a podcaster before, but this whole YouTube thing is a little bit out of my comfort zone. So I do have some things in mind I would like to improve on. I would like to improve my sound quality, and I would like to improve my video, but I'm still learning, and time is a difficult thing. When you have a day job and you belong to a lot of events and groups, it's really tough to find all that time to do all these episodes and things. So it really encourages me when I hear from you, and I know that I'm like reaching something in you that makes you go, I need to watch that show again, or I need to get my Bible out and see if that's true. I just want to encourage you to keep an open heart and open mind as you move forward with The Chosen. And I know you're going to love it. I just watched this past week was season 3, episode 5. Oh my gosh, it's probably one of the best episodes. Really good. And I can't wait to get into that episode because that one really I can relate to in many different ways. But I have to get through all these other episodes first before I can get to that one. And I don't think I had a chance to share this with you before, but I just interviewed Daryl Eves, who is an executive producer for The Chosen, and he will be on an upcoming podcast episode here very soon where he shares his story and a testimony inside of this. It's a great thing. We talk about his story, we talk about one of his family members, and then we just talk about The Chosen and where it's going and all kinds of things. It's really fun and exciting. And I can't wait to bring you that episode. And I think I've decided I'm going to bring that to you after I complete season 1, all these recap episodes that I'm doing right now. So this is episode 2, so I got 6 more to go, and then I'll do that Daryl Eves special. Very excited to do that. So if you feel motivated to share your transformation story, like how The Chosen has impacted your life, you want to share your favorite episodes, maybe it's impacting some family member, somebody you've prayed for a long time, and you're seeing The Chosen work in their life. Love to have you on here. And that's just so we can encourage other people to keep that open heart so that maybe God can move in their lives as well, because God is so great. And I'm so thankful that this show brought me in to follow this story. I love all the characters. I like how it's developing. I like Jesus. He's pretty cool. I love how they developed his humanity in the story. And it's helped me to reach out to my Bible. It helped me find a church. It helped me find church friends, Christian friends. And that's what I needed. I needed this big circle of development around me to help guide me and move forward with my journey. If you would like to join the Facebook group, you can find us at Walking with The Chosen. It's a Facebook group. You can join that and leave your comments. And like I said, I'm always looking for guidance from you guys to say, this is what we'd like to hear more of. So you're more than welcome to join that group and leave me a message on the website. That's all I have for now. I will see you soon when I do the next episode on episode 3, when Jesus is with all the children. It's a great episode. I can't wait to talk to you all about it on next time. So until then, just keep the faith, guys, and I hope you keep walking with The Chosen.